look at the news from a biblical perspective. In today's segment, I want to deal with the House Judiciary Committee hearing on slavery reparations that was conducted on June 19, 2019, on Juneteenth. In looking at that, it really caused me to think about our situation and what we as a people fail to realize. What we fail to realize are the spiritual implications. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to be misunderstood. We are certainly owed reparations based on what has happened to us. Just if you think about it, just put it in the context so we can understand. Because some people talk about, well, it's just being slavery. It's not just about slavery, but since slavery is an issue, obviously, this country's so-called original sin, and I say so-called because the initial sin or the wrong was the genocide that was done to the indigenous people. See, this country was based on genocide and enslavement, the theft of land and the theft of labor. Okay, so enslavement lasted for 246 years. And during that time of enslavement, you had people who were treated like animals. You had people who were castrated. You had people who were forced to breed. You had people who were dismembered. You had people's humanity stripped from them. You had families separated, children stolen, people kidnapped. Even some free blacks kidnapped. The denial of an individual's humanity. That's what it meant to be a slave. And the nation, it was sanctioned by the government. So when people talk about reparations as if it's just you getting some money from one person, no, the United States government, the U.S. government sanctioned enslavement for 246 years. After 246 years, and in addition to that, I don't want to leave out, I said forced breeding, but sexual assault that was rampant. So all these things that took place, okay, then you had 100 years of Jim Crow. After Reconstruction failed, you had 100 years of Jim Crow. You had forced segregation in schools, businesses, in all areas of society, particularly in the South. You had race riots where black people's blood was running in the streets. You had lynchings from 1865 to about 1968 is known as the lynching century, where Tuskegee did a study where they kept track of the lynchings. Okay, so you had all these things that took place. You had denial of social programs. For example, during the New Deal, during the Great Depression, black people were not able to benefit from the New Deal. You had whites who benefited from the Homestead Act. Not just whites that were been here, but whites who were immigrants. Also, blacks were not able to benefit, black veterans were not able to benefit as much from the GI Bill. So all these things took place. And then now we're in the era of mass incarceration, where blacks and whites use and sell drugs at the same rate, but blacks are much more likely to go to jail, much more likely to be incarcerated or receive more time. See, all these things are the legacy of slavery. It's not just, now don't get me wrong, because in looking at that hearing, what I did notice, and if we look at this honestly, what I did notice, and I knew this already, is that we have no leadership. Spiritually speaking, we have no leadership. And we have a bunch of people who are willing to sell their own people out for whatever they may and however way they may benefit from doing so. That's what we have for the most part. Now, some people there, I'm not going to say, some people there were sincere. Some people there were sincere, but quite frankly, there's a misunderstanding of our situation. So you can understand things from an economic perspective. You can understand things from a political perspective. But if you don't understand it from a spiritual perspective, particularly when dealing with us, because we are a spiritual people, we are the people of the book, you don't really understand the problem. And going to the government that has spent the whole time we've been here, the approximately 400 years that we've been here, they have spent using the time to throw it as one program of destruction after another. We shouldn't think that all of a sudden that they are going to be our saviors at the same time. It doesn't mean we don't deserve reparations. I'm not even saying sitting here saying we won't get them. What I am saying though is that even if we were to get them, we would actually still be in the same situation. Why? Because the problem is spiritual. Can you ever ask the question, how is it that these people were able to do the things that they did unto us? Where was God in all of this? That's the question people need to ask. How did we get in a situation today where we are on in a whole nother hemisphere, on a whole nother continent? We know the story vaguely. We ended up in some white man took us from Africa, then we ended up on some ships, and we're on the bottom of the ships, and then we start picking cotton. But how did that take place? See, you have to understand the spiritual dynamic of the problem. Let's go to Deuteronomy the 28th chapter. Deuteronomy the 28th chapter. Because we hear what we know spiritually. Like I saw one individual who I assume he was a descendant of slaves. I'm assuming. I believe he did say that, matter of fact. He had a collar on, right? See, we've had these men who are supposed to be spiritual leaders. They were on the plantations. And then you had them when we were able to build churches. They were there. And they are in our communities today as the pillars of the community. But what we fail to realize is that the religion that they gave and that they have been distributing, the belief system that they have been stewards of, is based in falsehood. Today's Christianity is falsehood. We inherited the false religion of our slave masters. We inherited their revisionist history of the people and the revisionist interpretation of what the scriptures are saying. So when we think about Jesus, in our minds we see a white man. We think that this white man is Jesus, and we think that these people that we're reading about in scripture are white people, or look white, or appear to be white. We think that the people who are in the land today calling themselves Israelis are the people of the book. That is not true. That is not true. The people of the book are a black people that have been scattered into the world via the slave trade. And the book actually tells us this. See, like I said, if you don't understand the spirit, you can break down macro and micro economics. You can speak very eloquently in regard to what we've experienced in this sojourn on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. But if you don't understand what Moses was talking about, you don't understand our problem. You truly don't understand our plight. That's why we can look at a program that Martin Luther King put forth and think that was the right program. He said, I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. That sounds beautiful. But what he was quoting, he was referring rather to Moses looking over into the promised land and not being able to get over. Moses wasn't talking about integration. Moses wasn't talking about integration. Moses was talking about land. See, a truly free people have two things: sovereignty, meaning the ability to control one's own destiny, and land. If you don't have sovereignty and if you don't have land, you are not truly free. I'm going to say it again. Two things are required for true freedom of the people: land and sovereignty. If you don't have land and sovereignty, you are not truly free. And we as a people have been trying to become a part of something, even though we built it. Even though a debt is owed. At the same time, we have been unable to truly become a part of this. And what really shows that is, I challenge you to look at the comments. Look at the comments. Look at the comments about the hearing. Read those comments. See, in anonymity, people show you what they really think about you. But even that was shown to be in Scripture. You see comments like, "What you want a ticket back to Africa? Over my dead body. Stop your complaining. Get over it." When slavery really destroyed the people. See, it's not a coincidence when you look at the indigenous people today who were placed on reservations, and you see the issues that they have. Because that's a legacy of having your land stolen, having your culture destroyed. I talked to one of the elders of the Lakota tribe in a class, and I said, "So what is your message to the youth?" And I'm thinking he's going to say, "Hold fast to your tradition. Don't forget who you are." He was like, "Man, you better get with whatever's going on right now." Because he's speaking what? From a position of survival. I was taken aback by that. But then again, look at what happened to his people. Now, some people can say, how can black people talk about reparations? On another note, how can black people talk about reparations? Look what happened to the indigenous people. Black people ain't got nothing to do with that. For the most part. That's something that they have with the American government as well. Because that, again, it was built on genocide and enslavement. And when you look at that Trail of Tears, people talk about the Trail of Tears that some of the indigenous people were on. Yeah, who were the indigenous people taking with them? They were taking their slaves. See, these so-called civilized tribes own slaves as well. They own slaves as well. Now you had different cases like the Seminoles down in Florida, and in other cases, but indigenous people own slaves. Everybody owned. So they tried to enslave them first. Then they had the indentured servants. Read Eric Williams' book, Capitalism and Slavery. Then they had indentured servants from Europe. That didn't work. The indigenous didn't work. But what did work, bringing us over here. That worked, and that's what stuck for a variety of reasons. He explains economic reasons as to why it worked. But spiritually speaking, we can understand how we got in the situation we are in. And also what's going to address the situation. Because we are engaged as a people. One of the things that the opponents to reparations said was actually true. Number one, one of them talked about outcomes, and some outcomes could be, even though he acted like your outcomes are not based on history and culture. Okay? The other talked about inappropriate behavior. We are engaged in a lot of inappropriate behavior. But that's because our culture has been taken from us. Where should we derive our culture from? We as God's people should derive our culture from the Torah. Because when he gave us instructions how to live, he gave us culture. For example, when you look at what people eat is part of their culture. Well, he showed us what to eat. The way people dress is a part of their culture. He showed us how to dress. He showed us how to live. That's what we should derive our culture from. And it will be a benefit unto us. But I want to pick it up in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter and the 15th verse. Because here Moses, prior to going into the promised land, foretells of Israel going into slavery. And let's read it and see if it sounds familiar. So you have to understand the spiritual aspects of the problem. It says in verse 15, but it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. So he says, listen, if you don't follow what thus saith the Lord, if you don't follow this Torah, this instruction that has been given unto you, you will be cursed. Now compare this, first of all, and we know if you read this Bible, you understand that Israel as a nation did not follow the Torah as was commanded. That whole thing, when they said that they would be obedient, you read in Exodus 19 and Exodus 24 that they would be obedient. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do and be obedient. You know that's not the case. Immediately they built a golden calf. Immediately they start worshiping Molech and Baal and the gods of the land of the nations in which they took, that God gave unto them. They started worshiping those gods of those people who the true living God cast out, the God of Israel. But then, nevertheless, it says in verse 16, cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field. In other words, wherever you go, you're going to be cursed. Think about the great migrations. You had several migrations just in this sojourn of black people, of our people, who from the South, after suffering segregation, after suffering racial violence, after suffering disenfranchisement, after suffering poverty, went to the North. And what happened? They were suffering the same things in the North. You realize black people in these urban areas who are in poverty, suffering right now, guess what they have? Reverse migration back to the North, back to the South. That's what's happening right now. Look at Chicago. If you look it up, you'll find that the African American, so-called African American population in Chicago is dwindling. Why? Because there's no opportunity. Chicago, as northern city, has a long racist history and present. But it says, cursed shall be thy basket and thy store. Economically, you're going to be cursed. It was pointed out several times in that hearing that white wealth is around $110,000. And for blacks, it's $2,000. You look at wealth, well, that's a legacy of slavery, enslavement. That's also a legacy of Jim Crow, being locked out. But spiritually speaking, Moses told you that was going to happen. Let's keep reading. Because somebody say, oh, that I don't know about that. Well, let's keep reading. Verse 28, it says, the Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. Well, I want to pick it up at verse 18, because one of the gentlemen that was there, he kept talking about the youth, right? I want to pick it up at 18 and I'm going to go. He said, cursed shall be the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy land, the increase of thy kind, and the flocks of thy sheep. So everything you have is going to be cursed. He said, including the fruit of your body. What's the fruit of thy body? That's your children. Look at our children. He said, they can't pass the test. Not only can they not pass the test, they're the ones that are incarcerated. They're the ones breaking into your home. They're the ones that are lost. They're the ones you look at, you don't have much hope for the future. But you have to think about what was given unto them. Again, inappropriate customs, inappropriate religion. So verse 29, it says, what says in verse 28? The Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Then it says, even if you think about that, from the time when you would hear the night riders coming to the time when your white boss got mad at you at the meal, or the time you hear the police behind you, you hear the whoop whoop, you hear that behind you. All these things, you in fear constantly. It said, and thou shalt grope at noonday as the blind gropeth in darkness. That's where we are right now. We are people who are in the darkness. We have no clue of what to do. No clue what to do. It says, and thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee. We've had leaders rise up, brilliant men. See, this is not about the brilliance of black people. Black people are brilliant. But I'm talking, when I say black people, I'm talking specifically the so-called Negro. Because it's misconception about that, like all black people are the same. Was it Connolly said, we tried to make amends for slavery. First of all, we wasn't here, it ain't our fault. And we've tried to make amends for slavery, we fought a civil war. And then he said part of reparations was, which was the stupidest thing I've heard in a long time, part of reparations was electing Barack Obama. We had an African American president. He is Kenyan. He is not a descendant of slaves. What he has, I see, but then again, you see black people again. They put him on shirts with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Marcus Garvey. He's not the same. If you look at it, who was it? I think it was Michael Eric Dyson. One thing he said about it, he said, if you put it in spiritual terms, so to speak, Barack Obama wouldn't be Moses, he would be Pharaoh. But nevertheless, but we're not all the same people. But nevertheless, he said, thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Now we getting into it. I spoke about the sexual assault that took place during slavery. That's what this is talking about. It said, thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. It's not talking about you going on to work and you come home and she with somebody else. No, the slave owner told you to get out. Get out. I'm coming in. Look at, and this didn't happen just in slavery. This was taking place during Jim Crow. This is what one of the things that Rosa Parks, when she was with the NAACP, that's what she was looking into. Sexual assault of women, black women, who were working as domestics. She didn't just only sit down on the bus and not get up. So it said, thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build a house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof. That's happened to us in various sojourns in captivity. You have the land, and then you don't have the land. You work the land, but you don't benefit from the land. You saw that in enslavement. You saw that in Jim Crow. It was talked about also in the hearing about all the land that was stolen from black people. You know black people, they say they got some land down south. Look at how much land we have right now. Google that. Is it probably approximately what, 1% of all the land? Verse 32. Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people. Wait a minute. What does that mean? It means your children are going to be sold. So we just read your wives raped and your children are sold. What does that sound like? Then it says, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. That's like in Sojourner Truth in that famous speech she gives, Ain't I a Woman? Where she talks about all her children, practically all of them being sold into slavery and nobody hearing her cries but Jesus. Verse 37, and thou shalt become an astonishment. Well, verse 36 actually. The Lord shall bring thee and thy king which thou shalt set over thee unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known. And there shalt thou serve other gods wood and stone. Again, that happened in various captivities of the people. But that's also happened today. I spoke about the false religion that we have. Christianity today is based on paganism. But that's what we were force fed. And we are still feeding that unto our people. So then we wonder why we come out of all these churches, because per capita, I would argue that we go to church more so than anybody. We come out of these churches and our neighborhoods look like war zones. The senator from New Jersey talked about how he was upset because over the weekend, 7 young men in his neighborhood got killed. So if you got all this religion, if you got all this faith, all this spirituality, why you got so much crime? Why you got so much poverty? It's because your religion is inappropriate. The religion is inappropriate. But nevertheless, it says, In verse 37, thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whither the Lord shall lead thee. Look at what other nations say about us. Read those comments under the hearing. See, when people tell you how they think about you, again, in anonymity, because it's politically incorrect at the time to speak about or be overtly racist. So what people do is they tell you what they think in anonymity, online. But what people better do is study Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877 and see what happened after. That's what people need to be looking at. Because history is cyclical. But nevertheless, it says in verse 41, thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. So your children are going to be sold. And he says something in verse 45 that's key. Moses writes, well, actually, let's read into it. Verse 43, it says, the stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. Is that not the situation in our neighborhoods even at this moment? The people of other nations will come fresh off a plane, migrate here, and will come in our neighborhoods and send their kids to Ivy League schools, sell us rotten meat, and then cuss us out in the store, and other black people standing around waiting in line to be served. They say, I'm still buying here. How many videos have you seen of black women getting knocked out in stores or getting assaulted in these stores? Was it in New York? I'm not sure if it was in New York, but I know it was on the East Coast, if I'm not mistaken. Where the women went into the Korean-owned shop, I believe it was Korean, and it was a few women, and then the sister didn't like how eyebrows were done. I think it was like $5 to do the eyebrows. She said, this is terrible, and got into a verbal dispute, and they pulled out those broomsticks and started beating them. I saw one where the sister got assaulted, and the brothers out there trying to protest with some other people. He said, okay. The owner said, fine, I'm going to just put weave on sale. 50% out. He had a line around the block of black women. And then when the brother said, but sister, they beating up black women in here. You know, she cussed him out. She acted like she wanted to jump on him because she wanted that weave. See, one thing enslavement did, brothers and sisters, it destroyed the mind. See, the destruction runs deep. The destruction runs deep. That self-hatred runs deep. But he says in verse 44, he said, he shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Economically, we are the tail. Does this apply to the people who call themselves Israelis today? Or do they run the financial institutions? Are they one of the wealthiest sectors of people in the country? Or wealthiest groups of people in the country? Verse 45. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed. Because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. See, this is why we're in a situation. If you don't understand the spiritual aspects of the problem, you don't understand the problem. People sitting up, over the years, you can imagine sitting up there, why, Lord, why? After all we've suffered, why, Lord, why? Why is this happening? Why are they doing this like this? This right here. This does not mean we're inferior. What it means is we were the people who God manifested himself unto, and we turned our back on God, and he turned his back on us and said, I see what your end shall be. See, you're not going to dwell in my land and do what you want to do and serve these other guys. You're going to get kicked out of your land. Matter of fact, I'm going to have these people come upon you. I'm going to kick you out of this land, and then I'm going to chase you in that land. I'm going to make you suffer wherever they send you. We bear this, brothers and sisters. This does not fit other people. Other people can talk about what they might have been through. This don't fit this. He said, and they shall be, I'm in verse 46, and they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. This is a sign. So when you see the people who have their wives raped, when you see the people who have their children sold, when you see the people who are economically on the bottom, who is it talking about? Let's keep reading. This is verse 64. It says, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other. We have been scattered all throughout the world. Europe, Asia, North, Central, and South America, throughout the continent of Africa. It's not a coincidence that you see people throughout the African continent that say, oh yeah, we the Hebrews, we the Jews. That's not by coincidence. The people that are in the land today claiming to be the people are converts. But nevertheless, he says, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And how did they get there? After 70 AD. Now you have the northern kingdoms or the northern tribes who had already been scattered. But around 70 AD, when the Judeans, after the Judeans were allowed to go back during the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, they reestablished themselves. But after the siege in 70 AD, those who weren't killed or sold into slavery right then, these are black Judeans, they went into the interior of Africa and established settlements, and had been doing that, had established settlements throughout the interior of Africa. You think about it. Jesus, he went down where? He went down into Egypt to hide. But they went further into the interior of Africa. Moses himself was mistaken as an Egyptian. The original Egyptians were a black people. I'm not talking about the Arabs that occupy Egypt now. So now they went into the interior of Africa and they settled amongst the people. And after years, during the time of the rise of the transatlantic slave trade, because slavery is not new, but then these were the people who were more susceptible to being sold, to being kidnapped, to being taken. And they were sold to these Europeans, the Portuguese. They were sold to the Spanish. They were sold to the English. Let's keep reading. You'll find that out. It says in verse, and they were given this false religion. But in verse 65, and among these nations shalt thou find no ease. And we haven't found ease yet. Neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest, but the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart and failing of eyes and sorrow of mind. That is the black experience. And thy life shall hang in doubt before thee, and thou shalt fear day and night, and shalt have none assurance of thy life. That's what's happened to our people. It says, in the morning thou shalt say, with God it were even, and at even thou shalt say, with God it were morning. For the fear of thine heart wherewith thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. Verse 68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. Wait a minute. Why does he say Egypt? Hold our finger here. If we go to Exodus, the 20th chapter, we can understand what Egypt represents, or the significance of Egypt. This is Exodus, the 20th chapter, and verse 2. Here, when we read the Ten Commandments, something is told here. In verse 2, it says, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt. And listen to what he calls Egypt. He says, out of thy house of bondage. Then he says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. See, oftentimes when people read the Ten Commandments, you see little kids reading the Ten Commandments, they don't talk about that part. He said, I'm the one that brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Egypt was synonymous with bondage because it was Israel's first bondage. Israel went into Egypt around 70 souls during the days of Joseph. They dwelt there in the land of Goshen. Then after some years, they started being persecuted by the Egyptians. And you had genocide going on. Then these people, they left with a mighty deliverance, who when you look at the time frame, you can actually line up when they left. They left Egypt into the wilderness, and then they went into the promised land of Canaan. But these were black people, brothers and sisters. And we are the descendants of those people. You say that's a strong thing to say. How could you say something like that? Well, let's keep reading. Verse 68, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. So he's bringing you into bondage again. How? Through slave ships. The hearing on slavery reparations was talking about enslavement. I didn't hear this. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, with slave ships. That's how we got here. This is not by coincidence that this is here. He brought us into slavery by way of slave ships. Why? Because of disobedience. Because we were the only people that God manifested himself unto. That's why Paul says, what advantage doth have the Jew, or what profit is there of circumcision? Much chiefly in every way, for unto them were committed the oracles of God. Amos writes, only you have known of all the nations of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities. He has not known another people like he knew us directly. God manifested himself directly unto our forefathers, to our ancestors. It says, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Meaning nobody's going to redeem you from this situation. We still here. But how do we get here? You have to understand what's going on spiritually. So they can sit there and talk. And even if we were to get reparations, it would not solve the problem. Because we have a problem ultimately, spiritually, with our God. And that's what we have to address. So what is the solution to our problem? See, it's one thing to even know the problem. They don't understand the problem. I mean, I heard people, some of these schools, Oxford, Yale, Stanford, PhD, all these degrees. Nothing wrong with having a degree, but this is not about a degree. You're not going to learn this at your Ivy League school. Let's go to 2 Chronicles, or in your seminary. 2 Chronicles. Because here Solomon, the wise king, makes a prayer at the dedication of the temple. Note what he says. He says in verse, this is 2 Chronicles 6 and verse 34. He says, I'm going to pick it up at verse, I'll pick it up in verse 34 and read into it. He said, if thy people go out to war against their enemies by the way that thou shalt send them, and they pray unto thee toward this city which thou hast chosen, and the house which I have built for thy name, then hear thou from the heavens their prayer and their supplication, and maintain their cause. So if they will pray toward what? The temple in Jerusalem. Then he said, if they bethink themselves, verse 36, if they sin against thee, for there is no man which sinneth not, and thou be angry with them and deliver them over before their enemies, and they do what? Listen, and they carry them away captives unto a land far off or near. That's where we are right now. So listen to what he says. Yet if they bethink themselves in the land whither they are carried captive, and turn and pray unto thee in the land of their captivity, saying, we have sinned, we have done amiss, and have dealt wickedly. If they return to thee with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their captivity, whither they have carried them captives, and pray toward their land, which thou gavest unto their fathers, and toward the city which thou hast chosen, and toward the house which I have built for thy name. See, he didn't say if they would just only ask for reparations. He didn't say, if they would just worship like Jesus. He didn't say, if they would just integrate. He said, you have to turn. If you find yourself in captivity, taken into captivity for your sin, you have to turn back to God with your whole heart. That's the solution. The solution is not going to be in a Senate hearing. The solution is not going to be in your Sunday church. The solution is not going to be at some new Black Panther Party meeting. That's not what a solution is. The solution is not a voter registration. The solution is not financial literacy. The solution is not going to be found in these institutions of miseducation. The solution is right here in the Word of God. For some, this seems far-fetched. You can take it or leave it. But this is the solution for our people right here. He says in verse 38 again, if they return to thee with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their captivity, whither they have carried them captives, and pray toward their land which thou gavest unto their fathers, and toward the city which thou hast chosen, and toward the house which I have built for thy name. Then hear thou from the heavens, even from thy dwelling place, their prayer and their supplications, and maintain their cause, and forgive thy people which have sinned against thee. Then he'll hear your prayer. How can he hear you if you continually sinning and doing contrary to what he said? How can he hear you? The one man who was against reparations, now he did have a point in one regard. He said, listen, who convinced us to kill, I'm paraphrasing, but who has convinced us to kill all our children through abortion? He had a point with that. He had a point with that. You killing all your babies, engaged in all this inappropriate behavior. Then you worshiping falsely. But you want to say, I'm blessed in the city and blessed in the field. But look at your situation. We cursed in the city. We cursed in the field. We curse wherever we at as a people. You got some people who are doing things on an individual level, but as a people, we're not where we're supposed to be. And even when you look at many of those who you know about, who many of us know about as the shining example of what could take place, when you really look at their situation, it's not the best, besides economically. And even their economics is chump change compared to those in that same industry who are the big wigs, so to speak, who are white. That's the reality. It's going to show you one person. Look at him. Look at her. That's one person. That's two people. Look at us as a people destroyed. So now this prayer was divinely confirmed. Because after Solomon got done praying, they made the sacrifices, and it says in 2 Chronicles 7:2, it says, and the priest could not enter into the house of the Lord because the glory of the Lord had filled the Lord's house. Okay? Then it says something in verse 12, and the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and have chosen this place to myself for an house of sacrifice. If I shut up heaven that there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. That is the solution, brothers and sisters. It's not reparations. Although you're not going to have me sit up here and say we don't deserve reparations. I never say that. At the same time, I understand, spiritually speaking, what we need is to turn back to our God. I thank you for listening.